Zizek's not alone in saying this. In his book, Less Than Nothing, he does say that. He says, even about Pol Pot, he wasn't violent enough. Now, Zizek, of course, has a particular meaning to violence. Zizek will say, I don't, of course, necessarily mean killing people. I mean contesting institutions. I mean defeating structural violence, and so on. But he says of all these modern radical movements that they weren't consistent enough, that they could have done better and achieved their goals if they'd been more consistent. So the idea is that there's nothing wrong with the project. It's the application of the project. Which, by the way, you find this on the neoliberal right. They would say, you don't think that America is a capitalist country. They haven't privatized the police. They haven't got rid of a central bank. That's not a capitalist country. No one has really done what's really necessary. If they really did what was really necessary completely consistently, then it would work. So in the 1930s, they say, well, it would have worked if there'd been the central banks that did exist or some other agencies had really reduced the money supply and had a large-scale what was called liquidation of everything. It would have worked. My response to that would be, what would have happened would have perhaps been even worse than what's happened if you really pull away the economic support, the monetary support, the stimulus, which completely in a situation which is already one of depression. What happens? I'll tell you what happens. You have a regime change. People don't put up with it. People don't stand for it. And the regime change can be benign or it can be terrible, which is what happened in Europe. The regime change can be from the Weimar Republic to Nazism. So I think it's a fantasy. But it's a very, very strong fantasy, this way of thinking, that what's wrong with a particular project is that, of any of these projects, is that they're not consistently promoted. So the way I interpret it is this. Politics should not be understood as the site for universal projects. Politics should be understood as the search for temporary and partial solutions to recurring human evils. That's what politics, how politics should be done. And the evils differ, they recur in different forms and different times. Their version, they can be in slightly different versions, but one shouldn't be so attached to a project of capitalism or anti-capitalism, a particular version of a religion, a particular version of anti-religion, that project is protected from its human costs. If the human costs mount up, then a project like the neoliberal European project becomes really quite costly. I mean, how many young people have had their lives cut short now for 5 or 10 years by that? They're not going to get those years back. How long is it going to be now in Portugal or Spain or Italy or Greece or even France before those young people who've been unemployed for 10% of them, 20% of them, 25% of them, or 50% of them, as in Greece, have been unemployed for 5 or 10 years. How long is it going to be before they're properly integrated in the society? Another 5 years, another 10 years, 20 years of their lives, gone forever? That's an irreparable loss. So I'm extremely suspicious and extremely hostile to those, even if the project began as a rather noble project, who say, well, we must press it further. What we need is more austerity. If we had really enough austerity, we can do it. Well, in Greece now, the austerity is such, for example, that anti-malaria, malaria is coming back because the pesticides and the various kinds of anti-malaria programs can't be afforded. There are more hospital infections because there aren't enough gloves. There are more suicides. How much austerity do you need? Maybe it was convenient if everybody died. Then it would be a complete victory for austerity. I think it's an absurdity. And I say that even though I know that there were great flaws in the Greek political system. It was very corrupt. There was a system of clientelism. There was an oligarchy. There were all these kind of problems and all these difficulties. Nevertheless, I think this is a dead-end policy, and it's a dead-end policy, a policy of no hope, and particularly if it said we just need more of it.